This short introduction, my apologies, will make this video a little bit longer, but hopefully it will make this video a little bit easier to use and help you decide right up front if there's any part of it you might want to watch. I cannot say, as long as it is, that this video is complete. There are things involved in the process of preparing the way that I prepare, and preparing using the tools that Star Trek Adventures provides, that will need to come out in conversation with people who have watched the sessions and have questions about the things that happen and how they were or were not tied to things like preparation and planning, pure improvisation, or some kind of middle ground in between, like we've talked about on the channel before. So there are distinct phases as we go through from each week prior to play. The things that were on my mind. Some things were not quite worked out at the time I had to record, but if they needed to be worked out, were worked out before play, in most cases that I can remember right now. But anyway, this process of preparation is not specific to this game. It's more specific to how I have learned to run things, and it's almost like an uneasy truce between me and my ways and what serves this game well. So this game has me preparing some things that I might not normally want to, and it has me interacting with things in ways that I might not normally choose to. And by negotiation, I mean that I've played this game extensively before, and I found a way to have fun with it that doesn't push the game outside of what the game is trying to do. I found a way to cooperate with the strengths of the game and introduce some things that I feel comfortable with in the spaces where the game is silent. So if you continue on watching this video, you're going to see me sharing things that were on my mind prior to the play of each session. Questions that I knew I needed to resolve, reactions to how the previous sessions had gone, or in the case of the first one, concerns or agendas that might need to be addressed somewhere during the course of the pilot. And you'll also see a relaxing over time. The way that this game ended up playing online was significantly different from how it plays around the table, and that was pretty interesting. So what I expected to take 2 sessions took 4. Now, if you watch the things that I actively considered for planning and the frameworks I built for myself for practicing improvisation, such as describing scenes, describing locations, describing people, that sort of stuff, and see what actually came out of my mouth and what actually became a part of what the characters did, then you'll have an idea of the way I approach those frameworks and what I consider to be important or inviolate game master preparation, and what I consider to be simply practice. You'll also get a good insight into why in my reflections videos I talk about the game not flowing as smoothly as I expect, or not feeling totally comfortable at the point of launching the game because of, basically finishing work, driving through rush hour traffic, getting home late for the session, launching the session and being able to go without really being able to, bring up these memories. Things would be a lot worse if I hadn't been able to build these frameworks and, have fun with preparation for improvisation during the week. Anyway, if you do watch this video, please feel free to comment below, especially if you have watched any of the actual plays that they pertain to. And I'll be happy to answer questions about, how things changed, how things stayed the same, etc., etc. This is how the pilot episode, The Nature of Threat, was prepared from my side. This video is the second to be recorded, but it will be among the last of the initial wave of recorded videos that I'm expecting to be revealed. And the reason for that is that this video, which may have parts of it recorded at different times depending on how the pilot actually takes shape. But this video is about the planning, such as it will be, of that pilot episode. So because this is a game that is trying to produce the feel of Star Trek television, rapid pace, highly competent characters, reversals of fortune, and these qualities that the characters have that, in a sense, snowball through the scene to produce something that is uniquely demonstrative of who those characters are. Right? So the way that all the mechanics of the game work, it leads you, and the game talks to you about setting scenes or structuring scenes, a scene for this and a scene for that. And this is one of the reasons why we have the secondary crew rules, the secondary characters, so that everyone can be involved in all these different scenes. So in the original series, we have a variety of crew members, and it's an interesting exercise to think about who among them are main characters, who among them are secondary characters, and who among them are just characters, and who are the NPCs. Now, the game can inform your thinking when you start to look at episodes from the point of view of what is a task? What's happening on screen right now? And is that a task? Are dice being brought into it? What's the difficulty? Is it difficulty 0? If so, it could be a secondary character that's undertaking it. If it's difficulty 1, then it can't be operating by themselves, right? So that informs decisions. Is this a complicated activity? Is this interaction between our believed main characters and these other characters, does it have the potential to produce some kind of revelation or some kind of friction? Well, maybe that character is an NPC. Is this a character that is too competent to be a secondary character, or is tasked with a task that has a difficulty higher than a secondary character who's not being played can handle, and who will be left behind? This could be an NPC. So when we start thinking about this dynamic, we can actually shrink down to a pretty small main character cast in the original series. And I think that's really interesting. So the setup for how the episode is going to work is going to be strongly dependent on who we actually get as main characters, if the decisions that they make are final. Now, I know that I'm going to be really busy the night before and the day of our first play session, which means I have to actually think a little bit about structuring some scenes. But as I mentioned earlier, there are different ways to structure scenes. A game master for Star Trek Adventures could think about the entire episode and what are the necessary scenes for the necessary characters in order to deliver and the impact of an episode that feels like it went from a beginning through a middle and to an end. And because this is a role-playing game, one would hope that anybody who engages in that methodology would structure their own thinking so that pretty much the only thing that is not even set in stone, set in clay, still wet clay, imprinted on clay, is the beginning. And depending on how that flows will inform how things are set up and between whom they're set up and where they're set up in the middle and how that all plays out and its connection back to whatever was the inciting moment of the beginning will lead all of us to the conclusion. But we can be even one step more removed than that. We can focus on that inciting moment, that spark for the first situation, and think about on what informs it, and then just play. So not even bothering to provide yourself with an expected shape or a possible shape, or if nobody does anything kind of shape. I need to be prepared for where to go. If you're not comfortable with that idea, then obviously preparing yourself for improvisation is a good use of time, because one of the outcomes of that preparation is that you have practiced improvising. You're just doing it without the time pressures and without people looking at you. The more you do it, the easier it gets to say, there's a thing. What are the many possible, branchings from that thing? And that's the skill that you need to interact and improvise in a live, it's happening now kind of setting. There will be days where things just don't work, but that's life. So I would like to do this with coming up with the inciting moment. Like in the case of this crew, unless we change our minds before session 1, we have chosen a crisis response. So that the ship is going to answer calls of emergency, earthquakes, natural disasters, cleaning up after attacks, rescuing the abandoned ships that exploratory vessels find, and stuff like that. So it's pretty easy to come up with a framework for the inciting idea. It's orders coming in from Starfleet, or a Mayday message coming in from somewhere, or being part of a patrol group in a dangerous or troubled area that has to be on call, like the Coast Guard or whatever. So we have a variety of situations within the larger framework of crisis response that can lend variety, but still serve the same function of here's a problem, right? And the expectation is that the crew will respond to the problem because that's their duty. And so a partnering expectation is that our purpose of play is to have some fun with responding to that type of mission, but also to have fun with who the characters are and how they relate to each other and all these other people who currently do not exist on paper or even as an inkling of an idea, right? But who will, through the process of play, be created, all of these secondary characters. So if the ship we end up with finally when we go to play is scale 4, which I believe it will be, then we could have as many as 4 secondary characters being summoned into existence and being accepted as having always been there. That's kind of interesting, right? So as the sessions play out, the ship will fill up with characters that we know. And as those characters are interacted with more often, those characters will become more known to us. And that becomes the other and maybe more, I don't know if interesting is the right word, maybe more dramatically satisfying source of things that episodes will end up being about. So that's kind of cool. So I could approach preparation for episodes by saying, okay, so we're going to open up with a message coming in from Starfleet or one of these other sources to go to this location and handle this crisis. And then on the way, look at the character sheets and see how, or look at the condition of their current values, look at their rising or falling reputation, look at things that have been points of friction between the crew and Starfleet, between members of the crew and each other, and use the tools that the game provides, such as expenditures of threat, such as challenging values and this sort of thing, to show the players, right, by changing things in scenes. Players, and this group is, I believe, going to be pretty proactive. Players will be doing things. They'll want to do things with their characters. And so by the use of threat and their use of momentum and their ideas about which values will matter and my ideas about which values could be, complicated in an interesting way, we're going to get our episodes. And because we have talked about Star Trek, and because we have chosen the original series, and the opportunity exists now pretty easily to go through various episodes and refresh our memory for the visuals and the way people talk to each other and the technobabble and all of this stuff. We have a lot of building material for episodes to rise out of. So I can feel fairly comfortable with the notion of just having the inciting event and trusting in the play group to play from that inciting event and trust in my dramatic instincts to cut scenes when they've reached the right point and move to a new scene, starting a new one based on what makes sense with what just happened or what makes sense in the context of that inciting event, the mission, without having to plan anything more than there's a crisis on, alpha, beta, gamma, right? So for this first episode, the pilot episode, things I would like to have be a part of the mission are that right off the bat, we learn, if we're thinking about it as an episode, how an episode would open, we learn some important thing. But as soon as my mind goes down that route, then I start finding myself trapped by the kinds of questions that I'd be asking myself if I were writing a scene for a story. So recognizing that impulse is important to me. and then, putting the brakes on and thinking to myself, is there some other way to think about this? So I took a step back and I thought about, well, what is the crisis going to be? And, do I want to create a random table of types of crisis and do it randomly? Or do I want to pick a fun type of crisis? And what I ended up with is there are certain visuals that I like. And there's some episodes that are among my favorite in the original series that involve a ghost ship. And where I grew up in Canada, along the Atlantic coast, it's often referred to as one of the most haunted places in North America and that kind of stuff. And I grew up with this poster of all of these shipwrecks of sailing ships, from the age of sail, this impossible number of ships that were wrecked off the coast of where I grew up. And so there's a lure, there's an attraction to ghost ships. So I thought, I got to have some fun. And so why not choose this favorite thing? So, all right, so there's a ghost ship. I'll think about that later. Well, where is this ghost ship? Are they, obviously the ghost ship can't call them unless something is happening and they just send out a general distress call. And that's when everything hit me and fell into place, and it felt like an inciting event. So what I'm going into the pilot episode with is that there will be another ship in the crisis response fleet, a larger ship, and it has already arrived on the scene of a crisis. And the crisis will involve an outpost, and that outpost will be in a place that is close to all sorts of different dangers. So it'll be far out beyond really heavily patrolled. It's like a new borderline for the Federation. The Federation is always expanding, and they get themselves into trouble by expanding into other people's territories. And then there's like, oh, well, we're really sorry. Let's make peace and live in harmony and that kind of stuff. So the best choices for that for me are among my favorite species in the original series, the Gorn and the Romulans. So there's a Federation outpost close to the shared border between the Romulan Star Empire and the Gorn hegemony. Now, I am not holding myself to canon that does not exist outside of the original series. I'm willing to be inspired by things that interest me, but I'm not holding to any of it. That's one of our points of discussion, points of agreement. So, I have a shared border between these two starfaring races, and in territory that is belonging to neither of them, at least according to the Federation, is this outpost. But it's close enough to be wary of interference from these two different groups. Okay. They're having some kind of emergency. I'm not really sure what the emergency is at time of recording, but I will be sure before we play. So they're having an emergency. Another rescue vessel has been dispatched, and our ship is going to be dispatched to join it, to assist. Pretty simple. And when our ship arrives on the scene, the other rescue ship has no crew aboard. All right. So this I like as an inciting incident because it creates decisions and points of decision that I neither want to nor really can reliably predict all of. Like, what will our crew do? Will they investigate the ship? Will they deal with the crisis? Right? 2 ships have been dispatched to deal with this crisis, so we get the feeling that the crisis is too big for one ship. So they're going to have to make tough decisions about how to deal with it in an unsatisfactory, we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough crew, we don't have enough whatever to deal with this crisis, because there are supposed to be 2 ships, but there's only 1. And meanwhile, something must have actually happened to that ship. Are we going to divide forces? Are we going to send some to deal with the crisis on the planet with the outpost? Are we going to send some to find out what's happening aboard the ship? Right. And once you start to think about it, you realize just how many or how large a situation this is for people to get a grip on and come to terms with in their own way. So I don't have to do any of that stuff. I don't have to create, well, first they're going to investigate the ship. Why is that first? Well, first they're going to go to the planet. Well, why is that first? Why does that happen at all? Why do they need to, beam down or take a shuttle down to the planet? Maybe there's some other thing, maybe there's a solution that can be undertaken from orbit. Maybe they'll want to work on creating, I don't know, some kind of beam or creative use of the phasers or relieving, I'm leaning heavily toward like massive tectonic activity. So maybe there's some way to use the photon torpedoes to relieve some of the pressure or something. I don't have to think about any of this stuff. I just have to present the problems. And these Star Trek characters are going to present ways to their players of solving those problems. And while that's happening, the players are going to be looking for ways to improve their chances, ways to generate momentum, ways to get more successes, get more dice. And all of that leads them back to things like their values and teamwork. And those things mean characters have to interact with each other or put on displays of being who they are, all of which spins off and creates exciting opportunities for there to be more interaction and, I guess, what we could call dangerously drama. So this is the first part of my, preparation for the pilot. I'm thinking that it might be worthwhile and different to do this in stages. So that, okay, we've got the first session, it's going to be 2 hours long. It's going to be the very first session, so there's going to be talk about rules and things. So we will be probably not getting very much done. Hopefully we'll start at an exciting point and end at an exciting point, but fingers crossed that's going to be what it is. So then that means that we'll have finished at some point, and ideally the characters will have some kind of, I'm going to say, plan. They'll be enacting some kind of plan or solution to deal with whatever problem or problems they have identified as being important to do right now, right at the point where that session ends. And so we'll stop because we run out of time. And then when we pick up play in the subsequent session, the dice are going to have to be rolled for the next step of their plan, and that's going to have its consequences, and that will lead us right through things. So there may be things that I need to prepare as a result of where the first session ends, right? They might be on the planet in the outposts, and so I'll have to have things like a clear description of the location, or I'll have to have things like a really juicy NPC to interact with, this kind of stuff. So for this specific episode, before play starts, I need to know the specifics of the crisis, the actual disaster, what's happening to the outpost, and what that means. So before play starts, let's say I do decide to go with massive tectonic upheaval. Before play starts, I'll need to have some interesting NPCs for them to meet if they go there. and to kill if they don't, kind of thing. And I'll need to understand how I want to represent the tectonic activity in play. And I'll have an idea of the layout of like a beam down point or shuttle arrival point, or what I'll be able to describe it if they use their, if they scan the planet, this kind of stuff. I need to think about what the ship can do. It can send shuttles down, so I need to think about where shuttles will land. The ship can use the transporter. What is, or where is the transporter pad in the outpost, or how many transporter stations do they have? I have to answer these questions first. And then I have to do the same thing with the ship, the abandoned ship. Now, what happened to the crew? Well, this is part of what's going to help me keep the episode from going on too long, right? When we think about crisis response, and especially if I go as it feels like I'm going to with this seismic event, then we can see this snowballing into lots of different activities and things I might not want to compress time over. I might not want to say, yeah, we start, doing shuttle relays, and a couple hours later, there may be lots of interactions that become very compelling. Who can say? So one of the ways that I can drop something, I can interrupt other stuff with something exciting, is the thing that made the crew disappear. So we want to have this original series feel. And in a sense, there was an ongoing arc. Like, we know that there's ongoing tensions with the Klingon Empire. We know we have a sort of Cold War with the Romulans once the Romulans are introduced. We know that the Tholians are out there being aggressive, and people are aware of them but not very aware of them, and this sort of thing. So I don't want to write in the pilot use the Romulans and the Gorn as the problem, but I do want to show the Romulans and the Gorn, or the Gorn, and we'll see what my instincts say, if we even get to a point that seems useful. But neither the Romulans nor the Gorn are responsible for what happened to the ship. But the Romulans and the Gorn are going to be present because this outpost is so close to their territory. And this is a place where strange things happen, because the uninhabited planet is actually inhabited by the broken remnants of a superior civilization. Now, this is my cause for two reasons. One, it's not the kind of storyline that I really like for myself, but it is a staple of the original series, and I want to see how these players, through whoever their characters end up being, interact with this notion. So this is going to not be one of those friendly, humanity, you are children, and we will guide you and protect you. And they're not going to be like the Organians. They're not going to be like the Metrons. They are instead going to be more sinister than that. And the episode I'm thinking of is what little girls are made of. I love Rock, the massive android who has existed for so long that he's forgotten about his own rebellion against against his creators, and this kind of thing. Instead, or not instead. So what I'm looking for is this kind of heavy automation and things that work because they were made by such a superior culture. And so something about what the ship does when it arrives, some way it tries to deal with the problem, triggers this defense. Now, the crew are not dead. They have been whisked down to the planet by some advanced transporter technology. So because a technological device has caused the crew to be relocated, there will be all sorts of ways that characters might be able to come up with for figuring out where the crew went. And when they start investigating the planet, there'll be all sorts of ways to detect that there's stuff going on that has nothing to do with this massive tectonic upheaval. And we can use the massive tectonic upheaval, the seismic event, as one of the reasons why this ancient technology is triggered now rather than, you know, when the outpost was built and stuff like that. Why are we only learning about this now? Well, because of, right? So it all falls together. And this is all I need to know. Right? So if the characters don't care who's responsible for, you know, don't care about the details of this ancient civilization, I don't have to prepare this stuff, which means I won't feel the urge to, you know, vomit forth and be the only person talking for a long time. I need to be aware that this is what I want as a motivation. And during the intervening days or weeks or whatever it is before we get to the point where this idea is relevant, I need to practice thinking about different ways to describe the, you know, the automatic, you know, the automata that are responsible for the action, right? And ways to hint at, you know, cultures. Is this a culture that's going to have, you know, massive statues and icons of itself? Or is this the kind of culture that leaves virtually no trace? Or has it been so long that everything is virtually crumbled to dust and there's almost nothing left? So the notion of alien artifacts and all of the stuff is relevant to the character creation process. Ron's character has an alien artifact, and I want there to be a sense that this is not just another one of those superior cultures that only seems to dwell in one place, and then as soon as the ship moves on, we never hear about them again. I like the idea that the galaxy, even this part of the galaxy where the humans and the Klingons and the Romulans and the Gorn and the Tholians and the Andromedans and the Vulcans are all butting up against each other, they are not the first species that have traveled and colonized and left outposts, right? So we're not stumbling across the home world of this superior civilization, this vanished or partly vanished or fallen civilization. This is just one place of many. Okay, so this is as much as I need to know for session one. It's actually a little bit more than I need to know for session one. We're not going to get anywhere near recognizing the cause of the disappearance of the crew, I think, given the 2-hour window of play and given that it'll be the first session. So I will record as necessary bits to add on to this video and release it all at once the pilot episode is done, to talk about adjustments that happened because of changes to character or changes to hopefully there's no change to the duty assignment, because that will have me really scrambling for coming up with an idea for the inciting incident. But anyway, whatever there may be changes in as a result of play or prior to play, I'll update in this video. So enough. Okay, so this is part 2 of the episode preparation video. First part talked longer than I intended. Surprise! About the underlying ideas. So this part, hopefully, is just going to focus on the topic at hand. Okay, we played. We got through what really amounts to 3 scenes. There's the overlong needed to have been cut into more than one scene events on the bridge. So we should have had a scene, we should have had the opening scene, and then the scene where the crew is in warp, traveling to the destination, and are trying to reorganize the layout of the bridge consoles for maximum efficiency with the new distribution of their crew. This needed to be a new scene. It needed to be a new scene for a couple of reasons. One, to give us a better sense of the flow of time. The way it is now, it seems like we go into warp and we're there, like Next Generation. Just not what I wanted. And two, it's got a different subject matter. It's a different topic. It involves different people, and in a completely different activity, it needed to be its own scene. But that was all handled as one scene. And the next scene is in the shuttle bay, and then the final scene is arriving at the destination. So at the point where the episode ends, we know that they're supposed to rendezvous with the USS Potemkin. And there's an episode, right, The Ultimate Computer, where, unless my memory fails me, we never actually see all of the ships on the screen. Right? We've got the Hood, the Lexington, the Excalibur, and the Potemkin. So, pretty sure we don't see the Potemkin. And even if we do, okay. I'm saying it's similar to what happens with our crew's ship, where it's transformed from the USS Dauntless, a ship of war, into the USS Avicenna, this crisis response vessel. That the same thing happened to the Potemkin. It's reorganized into a hospital ship. And it, I have decided, is a Miranda class, or at least it has that appearance. So they're to rendezvous with it. And when they come out of warp near the outpost, which has its seismic event crisis going on, they very quickly discover that there are no life signs aboard. Okay, so at the point where play ended, there's been not a lot of information back about causes from sensors. There haven't been really tasks assigned, extended or otherwise, into what's the nature of the crisis, what can we do, what's the nature of the problem on the vessel, what can we do. There has just been tasks involved with getting information, right? Was there damage to the ship? No. Are the engines active or inactive? Active, right? This kind of thing. Can we raise the vessel or the ground? Yes, we have communication with the ground. Okay, what are they saying? And what they were saying was, why did you do it? You've killed us all, right? And then we lose the connection. So at this point, all kinds of stuff can happen. They can get involved in communication tasks for trying to reestablish contact. They've got hints or indications that maybe the reason why contact was broken off was because of massive seismic activity, but this possibility exists, and there may be some way that they can use momentum to create opportunities, create traits, create whatever it is to enable communication to begin. Or they may realize, may decide, they may choose to feel that time is of the essence, and this very thing is a value of our acting captain. And so they may start acting rather than collecting information and collecting information and collecting information. They may have enough to move into action. They may decide to split their forces, some to the ship, some to the surface, right? I don't have to worry about any of that. As we talked about in the previous part, we know that there's ancient technology beneath the surface, and there's a fragmentary, broken culture hiding down in there, deep down inside the planet, which has been disturbed, and they're having their own little crisis as a result of this seismic activity. So the outpost is in danger because of the seismic activity. The ancient culture in danger because of the seismic activity. The remnants of ancient technology operating all by themselves because of the seismic activity. Effect, wiping out the crew on the USS Potemkin. Not named, by the way, after the more famous real-world Potemkin, but named after a totally imaginary virologist living on Mars in, our version of the original series universe. So, the USS Potemkin is there hanging in space. And the last thing that we saw before we ended play was that the momentum detectors, and these are talked about in Balance of Terror, right? The ability of the Enterprise was demonstrated for it to note movement, even though there was no visual phenomenon from the cloaked Romulan warbird. There was this sense of the ability to sense mass in motion. So this is in the same era. This same capability should be present for the Avicenna. So I spent my remaining threat, now the threat pool is currently at 0, in order to make sure that nobody sees this phenomenon. All right. So there are 2 characters present. 1 character is in the shuttle bay. Right. So I pay for those 2 not to notice the phenomenon. Okay. So what does that mean? It means that something that they cannot see, like on the main viewer, is approaching. But it is something that is otherwise detectable. So this will be a wave front of energy, right? Particles or whatever, and I'll have the exact terminology by the time we play. But this wave front can be detected by these, right? And what's it going to do? Well, it's trying to do the same thing to the Avicenna that it did to the USS Potemkin, that being to capture the crew. And all it does is put them in a holding area so they can be studied and determined if they're a threat or not, and have their secrets pulled from them, and all the terrible things that cultures do in the name of protecting themselves, which are, to use a word, inhumane and morally questionable. But why should a non-human species be held to the standards of whether it's humane or inhumane? Well, so this is the situation. This could happen. Will it happen? I don't know. That will really be determined by what the characters do. And you say, well, you've made sure that they can't detect it. I didn't make sure that they can't detect it. I've made sure that they don't see it in this scene, right? But the players all know, right? So when we open up, it's not going to be with a surprise attack from the game master, right? That's not the purpose of the expenditure. We're going to open up with some other items. It has become clear in listening to reflections between the first session and today. It's Monday. That the situation with the acting captain being an acting captain is of interest. And it's become clear that Ron wants the alien artifact to appear in the pilot episode. And that's really cool because I had, as I mentioned in the previous part of this, I had wanted there to be a connection between his alien artifact and this alien culture. He picked up on some other world as a remnant of their fallen civilization, right? So there will be some opportunity if they decide and his character decides to, visit the planet, or if they're taken to the planet, or whatever happens, for him to note some relationship between the artifact and this place. And, if everything works out all right, if we don't wind up with, the ship being destroyed and all the characters killed or whatever, if we wind up being able to continue on to another mission, now we have an opportunity for tension that the character wants to come back, right? They're a crisis response vessel. They're not a science and cultural studies vessel or any of those things, right? So there's this pull to want to come back, and what will that mean? Okay. So the particle wave is not going to be fast moving. It's not, coming up at warp. It's not an instant thing like, a relay is triggered and bam, you've been zapped. It builds, it builds, it builds, and it's going to operate like lightning, so that the ship is going to be hit and then a connection is going to be made. Why? Well, this ties into the totally improvised, you've killed us all aspect of the communication. I don't know where that came from, but I really like it. Why did you do it, Potemkin? You've killed us all. So as this circuit is connected between the target and the broadcasting equipment on the planet, there is a lot of uncontrolled discharge because the technology is failing. It's ancient. There's nobody there to maintain it. It's operating on automatic. And so in addition to all of the damage which has happened because of the seismic event, the now mostly unprotected outpost gets blasted by discharge from this alien thing. So why are all these connections necessary? Over the years, with a great enjoyment on my part of running investigative scenarios, one of the things that's always struck me as odd is that people say, well, if people don't find the right clue, the whole thing comes to an end. Or if people fail that one skill check, that all-important skill check, they didn't spot hidden in the right place if you're playing Call of Cthulhu, then everything comes crashing to a halt. And that has kind of baffled me. That was a skill I guess I didn't have to learn. It was something I just kind of lucked into avoiding as a trap. So it's natural to me that there are cross connections. There are different, that everything's like an onion. And so over the years, I have kind of become aware that this is how my mind works, and I try to encourage acceptance of connection. I don't like coincidence, though. When we were playing Star Wars, especially for so long, we played it for well over 3 years, coincidence is a feature of Star Wars. And so I found myself having to create coincidences, and I don't like them. So even the mildest coincidence can seem like a screaming signpost to me, like, this is terrible. But I do like to be aware of how everything is interrelated, right? That nothing is existing all by itself in a vacuum. So when we think about it, there are different avenues to give the players, if their interests take them in that direction, that using their skills, using their equipment, right, using the different opportunities that are available to them, they may end up in an episode that's about uncovering this ancient culture and this malfunctioning weapon or defensive system and all of this stuff. Or there may just be hints of it that suggest that there's something more out there, but with the imminence of emergency, they have to rescue the survivors from the outpost, and that's more important. And that's totally cool. That'll be an exciting episode. Or, they may also be focusing on what happened to the ship, and they may, in an investigation of the ship, come across traces of the particle, traces of the idea that there was a massive expenditure of energy, and You know, they certainly have the capability to discover it's similar to a transporter kind of effect. And then, you know, these people didn't get killed, they didn't get kidnapped, they didn't get abducted or anything. You know, the ship wasn't boarded and taken off. They vanished. You know, and there'll be all kinds of signs that this is what happened, like spilled coffee cups and things. So there are multiple avenues into finding what caused the crisis, which they don't have to follow. It's not their duty to figure out what happened. It's not in their duty to fix it, stop it, prevent it, or any of those things. Their duty is crisis response. Right? So if they want to focus on crisis response, then they're doing the right thing. If they want to focus on the crisis response and then investigate, then we can create some interesting tension with Starfleet as they're expected to move on to their next duty assignment, and some other ship will be dispatched to the area to figure out what happened. Or if they end up, through circumstance, through dice rolls and everything else, connecting with all of these items, then there are connections between all those items that help them navigate, hopefully interestingly, through all of it. They might be able to save the crew of the Potemkin. They might be able to save more of the people on the planet, right? And they might be able to learn something about the alien culture, and they might even be able to shut down the problem. Who knows, right? That's entirely in their hands. My worry is that this will make the episode really, really long. And this is not my primary concern, but it is a concern. So we have this transporter defensive unit and the way that it operates as the last feature of it, in that if things are drawing out too long and I start to become aware of it, then I have this mechanism for making something change. So, not to say that I'm not saying that if the players are going over here to do this and I don't want them to do it, I'll teleport them somewhere else to do what I want them to do. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if we end up with it feeling like there's no end in sight, right? It's going to be this thing, then the next thing, then the next thing, and the next thing. It doesn't feel like an episode anymore. It just feels like a campaign, right? Where there's no reason to bring about end scene. You know, there's no reason to end it. Then I have this mechanism that can help me do that. If we're fumbling for some kind of conclusion, if the sense of what the whole thing is about, right? That episode sense, that through line of the episode, then this hook, this item, this idea might help me be able to put in some ideas that help give it shape because of what it brings back from the players. And if there is a sense that things are flagging, that it's just, okay, go here, roll some dice, go there, roll some dice. If I'm not able to get a sense that there is the excitement of Star Trek, if we're not connecting on the adventure television show level, right? If I feel like I'm failing to register interesting ideas with the players, then this is something that I can also draw on to mix things up and see if this is a plane that's more fun to operate on. So, for the second session, which could be the end of the pilot episode, although I'm thinking at the rate of play that I saw and the fact that I'm going to be arriving at my house with about 5 minutes to set up and get ready in order to only be 5 or 10 minutes late. I will not have had those few moments that I like to have before a session starts to kind of center myself and get ready to facilitate the game and improvise ideas and riff off of what people are giving me and know where my notes are and all that stuff. So in this game, I've got notes. I've got their character sheets because I haven't been able to memorize their values yet, and their values are still likely in a state of flux. The way that they're written isn't, I don't think, exactly how they're going to end up by the end of the first episode. And we've got the ship's traits. I don't have them memorized yet. Everybody's focuses. These are things that need to be a part of play. So I'll have them in front of me, but I'm going to have to, be looking at them when we're playing instead of having them up here where I'm used to having them. So with all those things in mind, what I'm expecting for the second session is that we're going to rewind a little bit. The last order from the captain was to get a series of sensor readings and to move crew into different places, getting ready to act in specific ways based on those sensor readings. So we have those sensor readings to do, which will then indicate what the specific orders that are to be carried out are. That's a scene. Sick bay. The people who are going to go somewhere need to go to sick bay first, or sick bay has to come to them, depending on the determined urgency of the action. And from there, we have potential scenes. Where do they go? Wherever it is that they go, this is a scene. And who do they need to go with? That's secondary characters and possibly non-player characters. I now have a series of templates for standard people on a ship that can be quickly transformed into the secondary characters that the players create, by adding names and other details and moving numbers around quickly. So that's done. NPCs, I've been thinking about NPCs, but until I'm giving primacy to the secondary characters. So if a secondary character is created in a role that is ambiguous about whether it could be an NPC or a secondary character, I'm going to put it in the hands of a secondary character. I'm saving the NPCs for those specific roles that you need an NPC for. I think the best description of all of this that I have seen is on the Complex Games Apologist channel. He does a series on using the transporter, and he makes an argument for why the transporter chief, in this example, it could be Chief O'Brien, or it could be Montgomery Scott, not being main characters, not being secondary characters, but being NPCs, and there are reasons for that. And so it's definitely worth watching. Anyway, so I'm prepared for the outposts. I'm prepared for the alien culture. I'm prepared for the area where the defensive weapon is launched. I'm prepared for the Potemkin. So what does it mean to be prepared? Well, this video is already getting ridiculously long, but I have imagined what the outpost looks like. So if they go there, I don't have to fumble and invent description of its architecture and its doors and its computer terminals and the devastation that's been wrought by the seismic event. I can just say, I know that I need to hint that it's not just the seismic event that did damage. When do I need to make that hint? If they scan for what did the damage, right? That'll be a part of the basic information that goes their way. The Potemkin, I mean, we know what it looks like from just watching the series, how things tend to look on a starship, and we can extrapolate a little bit from the Wrath of Khan, if we like. And so, but we have the visual language of Federation starships of this area, the gray and metal and colorful. And there'll be no people on board. And we've seen episodes of Star Trek, the original series, that show us exactly that, the empty ship, the empty hallways, and how that feels. So they're going to experience that. And for example, in the Omega Glory, when they go to the Exeter, they find empty uniforms and they, this kind of stuff, as if something happened in the midst of whatever crisis they were happening. Like, bam, they were just gone. And so I can draw on those memories to help me describe the deserted feeling, the suddenly abandoned feeling of the Potemkin. So I'm prepared for that. As they go through applying their abilities to this problem, then everything falls into place because we know why it happened. So we don't have to push anywhere. We don't have to pull anywhere. We don't have to drop hints. We don't have to do, well, actually. All we have to do is allow them to explore the environment and interact with each other. So that's where I'm sitting for the second episode. I don't know if, or second session of the first episode, I don't know if there'll need to be another video. I'll make one if there does, and it will be horrifying. I'll try and keep it shorter than 28 minutes. Okay. I'm really sorry to add more to the length of this video. This is an addendum added on Tuesday. We're going to play tomorrow, barring life. But anyway, today, as I'm driving around doing things, I had the opportunity to listen to Casey's recent video. It's in the playlist about the character creation process for Ensign Yang. And we've all talked about the characters, and we all started character creation together. But at the end of the session 0 meeting, there were a lot of things that were still up in the air. Now, since that time, I've had a conversation with Ron about Korsakov. And all through this, I've been having some email conversations with Joseph about the acting captain, our Vulcan captain, which are falling into place as we discussed. But I haven't had the opportunity to talk with KC about his final vision of Ensign Yang. Well, now I've got it, and it's perfect. I love it. It gives us a great opportunity through his background and upbringing and his connections to movers and shakers on the diplomatic and political plane, to bring in a specific part that really makes the Star Trek universe of this era feel lived in, feel like the authors of that period who were giving it voice, they had something specific that they wanted to say, and they needed it out there, but there was maybe a limitation on how they could talk about it. It needed to be cloaked in metaphor, or it needed to be have all the serial numbers filed off, or whatever. But I find it interesting that throughout the series there are these moments where the men who lay their lives on the line find themselves at odd between the men who are sitting behind desks and making decisions about where you're going to go to lay your life on the line. Their struggles with diplomacy and diplomats and career politicians and this sort of stuff. So by having his character be connected to this aspect of the Star Trek universe, this is fantastic to me, because it brings in and it answers all these questions like, why is he on this ship? This is something really juicy that we can get into. I'm not going to talk about that too much now, because that's something for the future. But why is he on this ship? Why these particular assignments, right? And why are these different ships being paired up? There are all kinds of things that can add depth to our campaign world without writing a story, without constraining or requiring player activity. It's just something that fuels interaction and discussion. So it's very exciting. If you haven't watched his video about his character, please do. So there's a video out about Korsakov. There's now a video out about Yang, and we're going to learn about Tilyak in play. So we have to watch the actual play episodes to see the shaping of our Vulcan acting captain. But this is very, very cool. Each character has given us not only an interesting character that can go out and do things, but going through the life path process, taking that seriously and allowing it to blossom into an idea of who the character is, going beyond what's on the page and connecting all the dots into something coherent and real and logical that makes sense with the character that they want to portray. How did the character that they want to portray end up that way? Well, through these events. And KC and I could have rolled the exact same events. We're going to create completely different characters, right, because of what we bring to the table. So I really like what he's brought to the table, and it's going to give so much more flavor to the campaign. So I'm pretty excited about small little details that I can add into normal description that bring some of these qualities out without having to start a B storyline that takes place in some forgotten part of the ship or whatever, and that just plays out to fill time, right? To make sure the episode is 40 minutes long and meets its commercial beats on time. No, this will be fundamental, baked in, essential ingredient of the atmosphere and feel, the taste of our very gritty Star Trek universe. So, all right. Until part 3, I don't know. We'll see. All right. So, I just have a few minutes, but this is a video adding to the growing Frankenstein video that I'm stitching together for the preparation that has gone into the pilot episode, The Nature of Threat. All right. The second episode, the second session, part B of the episode, moved along at a pretty nice pace. And while I was concerned during play about the balance of rules to action, in conversation with the players afterward, they say that so far they're okay with it. And that makes me feel all right, because we've broken the back of introducing new ideas and actually practicing them. So from now on, mostly it will be using the rules that we've already established, making secondary characters, doing extended tasks, doing normal challenges, that kind of stuff. So we're golden. But because there was so much action in the second scenario, because we took the time to create a secondary character, because I introduced an extended task and so had to explain it, and each stage of it, and that introduces new types of dice and they need to be explained, and right. So because of all of that, we didn't get very far, and in terms of resolution of why the characters are there, which meant we had beaming down to the planet, which was prioritized by the players. That's what they wanted to do. So they didn't want to go to the Potemkin. They didn't send a investigation or anything along those lines to the Potemkin. Why do I think that they might be interested in going to the Potemkin? Because it got there first, and it experienced probably what they are experiencing, and was accused by the surface of killing them all. So I imagined that they would want to know what might be in the ship's databanks. But in no way is this a requirement, right? And there's nothing to say that it won't happen really soon. We haven't had much game time actually elapse, right? But we feel, it's bleeding through to me, we feel the sense of urgency of dealing with the wounded. Right? So the crew has bravely thrown themselves into that. So we get through our first role-play experience of a rescue. And during that rescue, they discover that there's this other pocket of, a small group of survivors that is inaccessible. So they're going to have to beam up to the ship and then beam that down to this new location. And this is going to entail quite an amount of risk. So I imagine that they're going to start thinking about all of this. They're going to think about, well, if this outpost had a personnel of 500, and if the majority of those 500 people are still alive and trapped rather than dead and buried, then we're not going to have the space on the Avicenna to, to house them safely. So they may need to use the Potemkin as, as a hospital, its purpose. So either way, I think something will compel the group to go over to the Potemkin, unless, they totally abandon the mission or something along those lines. Okay. There are factors that need to be a part of the pilot to be fair to the people who created characters. Things like particular interesting pieces of background or things that are tied to their values and so on and so forth. So I didn't have the opportunity in the second session where I'm going to forever after feel like it belonged. I didn't get the idea to introduce the notion of Ambassador Yang and Ambassador Yang's interest in, Ensign Yang's safety and success and ability to move up through the ranks and stuff like this. And it didn't need to be a big scene, but there just simply was no place to put it. I was moments away from introducing it when Joe pointed out that the 2 hours had passed. It's just like that. So I missed the opportunity. So I imagine somehow in the next session, this notion will come out. Some way to get it out there, right? And enable the players to interact with this juicy piece of information that, this highly placed diplomat is watching the progress of her son, and he's on your ship. That's kind of interesting. And there's the alien artifact that Korsakov has, and this is fundamental to the situation that they're in, right? In order to have that alien artifact be an ongoing presence, it has to have some kind of resonance, right, with the setting. For my aesthetic satisfaction, there needs to be more. So when we look at the original series, we see this suggestion planted that, like Arthur C. Clarke posited, there was a species that was the gardener of the universe. And ultimately, in the Next Generation, this idea is explored in the manner of the Next Generation. But it's an interesting and intriguing idea. So if there was a species so old that was going around sowing, right, all these human populations and terraforming all these worlds to be Earth-like or like Earth, it raises the question, were they the only one? And so that's kind of the direction that I'm going. There's some interesting setting and situational opportunities. What if, as we mentioned before, there was a starfaring society which is in this massive state of collapse? And what if the alien artifact that Korsakov has found is from one of their completely fallen outposts? And what if there's an opportunity to recognize something about it here? Right. That'll depend on where Korsakov goes and how involved he is, if he survives and all these other things. But there's an opportunity to introduce the alien artifact as relevant to this location. Not the answer, not the MacGuffin, not the key, like, oh, just put it in the slot and all your problems are solved, but recognizing that the strange history of this event and the Avicenna, previously the Dauntless, right? Its captain, Stian Anders, right? There is this connection, and so I'm hoping that it will be possible, that it will feel right, that there will be time to introduce these things, right? And that ties in directly to the nature of our acting captain, right? Because Captain Anders has been removed because of interaction with discovering the alien artifact, right? We now have our acting captain. So all these things tie together, and our acting captain is on a ship with this, curious history and the very well connected Ensign Yang. It's lots of juicy opportunities for role play, interaction, stress, fear, character growth and development, all these things, and all of it in the hands of the players. Not something that I have to, keep poking and prodding. I just get to spin it into existence with a certain shape, and I've drawn all these elements from their characters. So the things that I want to introduce into the setting, the things that I'm interested in, that serves like as the stage. And the things that the characters have brought, well, that's what's going to play out on the stage. I'm not terribly interested in putting actions or events, right, into motion. It's not like I want to see a particular, the arrival of the Borg, and the Borg are going to do this, and it's going, right, that kind of stuff. If we were playing Next Generation, I'm not particularly interested in the Klingons discovering a way to dodge around the Organian peace treaty. I'm not interested in the Romulans doing something. I am interested in presenting a stage where all those tensions exist, and because those tensions exist, there are moments of crisis that break out like wildfire across Federation space, and as a result, the Avicenna is going to have to go there and deal with them. But the crew of the Avicenna, they are always people. And I want to see the players being able to feel comfortable and able to inhabit their characters, to find that place where it feels natural to say I and have everyone else understand that you are speaking in character, and not feel the need to always be out of character because there's this lack of real connection or real certainty about where we are, why we're there, what we're doing. So for part C, which I'm not even going to predict will be the end, I'm just not sure. For part C, elements I want to introduce into whatever scenes the players are going to create, right? The rescue is in their hands now. Everything is up to them, right? Where they're going to go, how they're going to do it, how they're going to search for survivors, what they're going to do about this strange beam of particles washing up to the ship from the planet, et cetera, et cetera. All that stuff, that's on them. They're going to be responsible for the scenes that I create. I'm going to frame the scenes, but they're going to create the scenes. So I just need to, for aesthetic purposes and as honoring of these three main characters, I need to spin these elements. The well-connected Ensign Yang, the alien artifact of the experienced, right, security chief Korsakov, and the nature of command, the safety and the responsibility and the legitimacy of the command of our acting captain. So I'm looking forward to seeing if I can find the right time to do that strikes my own sensibilities, but also the sensibilities of the players as right. Can I do that? I don't know. We'll see. So it would seem we're going to have a part D. But this time, unlike any of the previous times, it feels really like we're coming to the end of things. Way back in part A, I speculated that there was about 4 hours of play in the situation that I had proposed, based on my play of the game in the past, face to face. So we have learned a little bit about how much slower it is to play and explain, the game through a purely online environment, which means that things like the momentum and threat tokens have an effect on connecting concepts and linking different activities together through their visual and tactile stimulation, creates the memories much faster than simply talking about it and then being able to see it represented on, like a slide on your screen. So that's really interesting. That's a confirmation of a confirmation of a confirmation from, years of observation, let's say. But each group always feels a little different. How is this group going to connect to the concepts, and how quickly are they going to do things? Now, this is a system with a lot more moving parts than maybe I am used to, kind of, or at least differently moving parts. But they're not very complex. There's just a number of them. So it feels like a very layered system, as we've said before. Anyway, so the effect on the speed of communication of the ideas and receipt of confirmation that the ideas have taken root, both from the player's own proactive and dynamic examination of the rules on their own and by our exploration of the rules together, that had an effect on the timing. Plus, what the players chose to do had an effect on the timing, as it always does. So you sometimes end up playing with groups that are more interested in, let's call it the action, right? They're more interested in having their characters do something than they are in having their characters interact with each other, or at least interact socially. And we have some groups that are more interested in doing things with their characters than they are in articulating qualities or details about those characters. And so the combination somewhere along, the spectrum of possibilities that each group produces affects timing. And there's the fact that we weren't playing for 2 hours. I felt like we were going to play for 2 hours, but we ended up playing for like 80 to 90 minutes for each of the sessions. So that, of course, has an effect. There's, half an hour missing from my projection of how much time we would actually have. So, for part D, which now feels like an end, that means for me, and that I have a real sense that it won't at all feel like an episode if things don't come to a conclusion now. Why? The mission, and it is a mission, right? They were assigned a mission by their commanding officer in Starfleet's crisis response detachment or division. They're assigned a mission to rendezvous with the Potemkin for, dealing with this crisis affecting the outpost, this earthquake. So they have traveled to the area. They have, in a sense, rendezvoused with the Potemkin. They have found the surviving residents of the outpost, and they have formulated a plan to, get them off planet. Because obviously there's really, until all this seismic activity, whatever is causing it, settles down, there's no place that's safe. It's on too massive a scale. So this means that a very large amount of the crew will need to be involved in these rescue operations, and that both ships will be needed, which means transferring some crew from the Avicenna to the Potemkin, at least a skeleton crew, to get it up and running to receive patients, or at the very least be able to get underway and get to the nearest starbase to be able to deal with these colonists. We may wind up having to make some difficult decisions about leaving people behind, and or they may figure out a way to make it possible for everybody to fit on both ships. That's up to them. That's their solutions to problems are not of any particular interest to me to predict. So, if that's the case, once they have removed the settlers or removed the residents of the outpost from the surface of the planet, then it's time to leave, right? To get to larger facilities, because overcrowding is going to be a problem regardless of what their solution is. And that essentially qualifies as the end of the mission. So this could be represented by zooming in excruciating detail on every part of implementing this plan, or some very specific scenes could be set up in order to give us a more abstract view of this. Now we have focused, in a very granular fashion on one rescue mission where people were actually trapped. But now what we need to do is ensure that there's a safe path from where the survivors are to where the survivors can be extracted. So that's one scene, right? And that may be something like Ensign Yang and Lieutenant Korsakov accomplishing that mission, or it might be secondary characters. It might be the acting captain coming down with his own landing party. I have no way to know how they're going to approach that particular task, but that particular task needs to be done. They've already discovered it's very difficult to establish communication, and the idea of transporting out 500 plus people, right, it's going to be fraught with problems. So they do need to get them to a place closer to the surface, less impeded by the disturbances, right? Getting more information about the wave of particles and the associated energy disturbances. This is something that can be accomplished in a couple of ways. Obviously, the Potemkin got here before them and experienced things before them, and possibly had an opportunity to learn more, at least to give them some kind of leg up, to give them some kind of advantage in figuring out how they can minimize the effect of that problem, how they can cancel out the complication, and in system speak, to facilitate their rescue efforts. So if, and well, I guess now it's when, right? They've decided that they need to bring the Potemkin back to life, kind of thing, in order to house these survivors. Hopefully, for their own benefit, they will dig into the records on the Potemkin. Whether or not that gets involved remains to be seen. We don't know, but that will definitely make things easier. So we've got the need to move the people to a different part of the collapsing outpost in order to start moving some people, and they'll have to decide which people those are, whether the most injured people are going to travel by shuttle or something else. This will also be an important scene to make the shuttles seem real. I'm feeling like what I'm hearing, listening back to the actual play, is that they think the shuttles can carry more people than they can. And I don't think that the sense of the real size of the shuttle is going to truly manifest until we use them in play. Of course, right? So once that part sinks in, that whole loading people on the shuttle, deciding who's going to go on the shuttles, that kind of thing. Sounds like it's going to be a scene on its own. But we're not going to use the 2 hours that we have, or the 90 minutes that we have, whatever it turns out to be, on shuttle ride after shuttle ride, or on, adding more and more complications to getting people off the planet. So how this is going to be represented, I feel, is going to be a little dependent on who's involved in it. If it's all crew and not main characters or currently known secondary characters, then it's very likely to happen off stage, right? We can assume a certain amount of success. And if at any point I feel uncomfortable with that, I can resort to the dice and see how I feel about what's going on with the crew from that. Things that will make me feel like involving the dice are necessary for this rescue, if it's happening with, unnamed, unknown characters, right? If it's being relegated to those characters while our main characters handle something else of importance. Things that will make me feel like roles are necessary are if things are taking too long, or if complications have been created by other things that have happened before it, right? So that we have some kind of snowball effect, all these things leading to piling more complication and adversity on top of the crew of the FSN. Now, there's also the problem of the crew of the Potemkin, right? Needing to find out where they are, because they're not in with the residents of the outpost. They're not in with the survivors of this catastrophe. They are somewhere else. So this is what I'm talking about. If there's a long delay, if our main character landing party goes off without setting up sufficient orders to make all of this possible, then it's going to fall on secondary characters who perform at a relatively different level than our command crew might be able to do. And so, right. So who can say? So we've got moving the people out to where they can be extracted, which may or may not turn out to be some kind of extended task. And we have at least identifying what happened to the crew of the Potemkin. This is another task. These are things that they are capable of finding out. Maybe they will, and maybe they won't. So, if we get to a point where we're nearing the end of the session, and a good procedure has been set up to rescue the survivors of the outpost, then the pilot will come to an end, and there will be a coda about the crew of the Potemkin, right? If they've been unable to track down that aspect of things. If they manage to do both, the episode will still end. And depending on the pace is going to rely on my instincts to abstract things so they move faster, right? Similar to like an episode of the original series where where repairs need to take 3 or 4 hours, and we skip ahead in 15 seconds, and the 4 hours have passed. I need that emergency power, Scotty. It's like, just a few more minutes, Captain. That kind of stuff. So we won't be, or I won't be, in a posture where I'm looking to deny activity or action. I will be looking to zoom in and zoom out on the chosen activity or action, depending on where we are in the scheme of things, which means I'll need to keep an eye on the clock. So there are a few things that I've got up my sleeve, I guess, tying back to this whole thing, right? So from the beginning, it was important to establish a sense of an older settlement of this part of the galaxy by more ancient civilizations, right? original Star Trek is full of these intimations, and very few of these things were, if any, were actually capitalized on by the series itself. So this is one opportunity to bring those out. So the alien artifact that's connected to Korsakov needed to be established. Well, now, in a sense, it has. Right? So he recognizes that the alien artifact that he found on some other planet, with an earlier version of the crew of the Avicenna, which was then called the Dauntless, it's the same type of technology that has been found here, right? So this establishes his interest. It brings out this aspect of character, and who knows where that could go, and what Ron's going to do with that. We needed to establish what exactly are Ensign Yang's connections to the upper echelons of Federation society and Starfleet's organizational structure, and we have, in a sense, done that too. We've planted this seed that powerful people are interested in his success. We've also inserted a hook where his brother's among the missing of the Potemkin. And where we left off, he doesn't know this detail about his brother. So that is also going to be an aspect of Part D, maybe spurring the decision to try and figure out where they are. So what does that leave? Well, that leaves the fact that this outpost is very close to both Romulan and Gorn space, and the activities that are happening here are anything but subtle. Right? The fact that the outpost is here would be troublesome to both, and what has been happening since is something that would be noticed by both. But the Romulans being the Romulans and the Gorn being the Gorn, the last piece of the setting that I want to be able to communicate are those attitudes, the meddlesome, deceitful nature of the Romulans, and let's call it the forcefulness of the Gorn. The Gorn certainly aren't above deceit, but it seems the way that they are depicted is that they're a highly skilled society that is able to look for weakness and exploit it. If we look back at the episode featuring the Gorn, we see them turning Federation technology against them, and when they recognize that the fight isn't even, they're not going to be able to exert overwhelming force on the Enterprise, they run. Right? So that's interesting. So the Romulans, on the other hand, have cloaking devices, and they have spies in the Federation, et cetera, et cetera. Romulans posing as Vulcans, and so I want to be able to establish those things. The very clever, right, thoughtful, tactical Gorn, and the devious, surreptitious nature of the Romulan Star Empire. And so that's the last thing I need to put in. That may end up being, again, just a coda attached at the end if we don't have any time, or it may be a final scene. Right. So for me, I'll have to keep an eye on the clock. I will have to be fairly firm about starting and stopping scenes and keeping them moving by allowing more to be done in each scene by abstracting more. And we've reached the point in the episode where it feels okay to do that. And last time we didn't have to talk about the rules very much, and so I'm expecting the same this time, because we won't be using anything new I can't imagine, right, that we haven't already covered. Even if things go to combat or something along those lines, we've already brought those mechanisms into place. So Let's see how things go in part D, the fourth part of our projected two-part scenario. But like I said, I have no particular attachment to ending it on time. My fear is that it will not feel like an episode in this format. And that episodic feel is important. Anyway, this is probably the last video. But who can say? Take care.